the 4.5 types of self-sabotage that destroy your relationships, business, and personal life, with the 5-step system solution included at the end. So the table of contents is number 1, self-sabotaging relationships, with the 3 different types of relationships broken down. 2 is self-sabotaging workflows, with the 3 polarities of workflows. Number 3 is self-sabotaging via a lack of self-confidence. 4 is self-sabotaging via opportunity execution, the polarity between risk and caution. So 4A is caution, 4B is going to be detailing risk, and 5 is the conclusion and action protocols I have included in this. So we'll get straight into it. There's 3 different types of relationships, okay, you can have, which are romantic, social, professional. These are the relationships that we're going to zone in on, and how you're actually self-sabotaging and how to overcome them, of course. So the first way, if we look at relationships as a whole, is saying I'm not there yet in work and business, when really in reality it's because we don't feel like we've built the skills, or we have the time, or we feel like we have the competence to actually go out and try and connect with people. So what this is dealing with is the more social and romantic type of connections. So in a lot of clients that I've had, a lot of the time, if they're really high achievers, overachievers even, or high performers, they will take that same mindset into establishing relationships. So until they get that perfect, until they feel perfectly competent, until they can kind of work at home on relationships, whatever that means, until they feel good enough, then they'll actually go out and they'll actually start making moves in that area of their life. But it's a false fallacy. So I work with a lot of software engineers. There's one friend I have who has a PhD in AI and machine learning, and he spoke to a pain point which I see in a lot of these guys that I work with, which is that when you're in that kind of a career, software engineering doesn't just have to be software engineering. It can be also running a business. It can be also working in corporate. You can kind of build the skill by shutting yourself off in, like, at home, and just like work and do homework basically on it. That's like very abbreviated. But essentially what it means is that you can gain a competency, you can fail on your own with nobody looking and nobody there to criticize you or embarrass you, until you gain the competency, and then you can start moving out. The problem is when it comes to relationships, whether it's social, professional, or personal, or romantic, I mean, that you don't have this opportunity. You actually have to go out there, and part of the skill, or part of the feeling, part of having that connection, is you have to risk something. You have to risk maybe being a little bit embarrassed. Like, let's say there's somebody that you're interested in and you want to ask them out for a date. Well, the whole reason that gets rewarded is because there's a no in that. You can be said no to. And not only can you be said no to, it can be quite embarrassing as well. Or with a social relationship, with a personal relationship, in order to get deeper connection, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. You have to share something about yourself, right? Because usually we have to lead by example, and the other person, if they're ready, they'll follow that example because they feel safe. Because you're the person that's led that, you're the leader in that relationship. Sometimes it can happen the other way, and we don't want to block that away. But there's an element of risk there. Because in order to be vulnerable, it is a bit risky. Like, you have to show a side of yourself which you don't feel safe and secure in. Now, that can come from a shadow, or it can come from maturity. But either way, it connotes risk. And then with professional relationships, right? There's a skill building there too. I recently just got off a call with one of my one-on-one clients, where we go over the framework of a communication model that I use. One of them which I use is DISC. Originally taught to me in a sales context by my mentor Pierre. But you can learn the frameworks, you can learn the theory, you can learn all of that, but there still has to be an element of going out and talking to people and seeing what kind of stuff sticks to the wall, and then going back. You can't just push that away and be like, oh, when I feel good enough, when I feel ready enough. It doesn't work like that. So again, waiting for it to feel right and perfect when it never will. Deep down, usually, and this wasn't with the guy that I was just working with, but it happens on a few of the free calls that I used to have ages ago, and in the past business I was in, business called Social Sage. Deep down, people have usually swallowed the lie somewhere that in order to be successful in business, work, or whatever your endeavor is, like, just put whatever you want to be there, that involves some kind of relationship making, which is basically all work, by the way, because we're social creatures. We have to sacrifice relationships or that somehow building that ability to be able to connect with somebody in a short space of time or go deep over a long period of time is somehow useless. Somehow that's something that's not useful, right? We have to sacrifice it. The sacrifice comes from usually not believing that we're big enough to hold all of it. One of the biggest breakthroughs that one of my recent clients had, a different client to the one I just talked about, was that he realized that he could have it all. So he's a successful, kind of really positive fitness influencer, got an amazing relationship, all that kind of stuff. What he didn't have was there was some stuff his business just wasn't fully clicking internally, right? And as soon as we were able to get over that barrier, he realized that the reason he was holding himself back, right, before he was really going into his business, but he didn't have relationships. Now he has a really cool relationship. He was stopping himself from going fully into his business because fundamentally he didn't feel like he was able to have all of that stuff. If you're interested in shadow work, I have my 3-hour free guide to shadow work, the most practical guide to shadow work on the internet, in the link and the comment below. Just sign up your email, it'll be sent over to you, and then I'll send you an email as well just to check to see how you're doing, making sure you're getting the best out of that product. That's the best thing I've seen on the market that's out there for free that will give you a comprehensive view of how to heal your unconscious shadows, your unconscious beliefs in a very effective and efficient way. Like I said, it's super practical, it's designed for all levels. Go ahead and download it and you'll be able to start working through these beliefs by yourself. The other part of this, so it's not just a sacrifice, the other polarity of this, like I said, is this idea that somehow they're useless. This can happen to more logical, thinking-based guys who kind of, to put colloquially, maybe have always had an interest in things rather than people first. I've actually always had an interest in people first, but I can understand the perspective because I've been around it so much. Again, that's super broad speaking. There's a ton of nuance to add there. Because it speaks to our biases or it speaks to our blind spots, if that's the type of person that we are, it's very easy to pick up the introjection or the belief that relationships are useless to us and what really matters is the bottom line and working on X, Y, and Z. But then when they have all these issues with connection, not having intimacy, not having some friends around them that really understand them, not having a partner that really understands them, which all comes eventually, because at some point they start to crush you with career and business and they can free up time to look at elsewhere. Now they have a mountain to climb rather than just a molehill, which is how it would have been at the beginning, you know? And meanwhile, usually this type of person craves connection whilst having no idea how to build, maintain, or find it in a mature, healthy, and fulfilling way. And what's more is that there's opportunities right in front of you right now. And you're unconsciously saying no to them before you even have the chance to say no to them consciously. At least if you're going to say no, make it be with the full conscious maturity and not just an unconscious shying away from it. Because the dirty thing here, or maybe not the not so dirty thing here, but the dirty thing from people coming from this perspective, definitely from a lot of the people that I worked with in the old business I was a part of, and a couple of people that I've taken on in since starting this new business, is that really what it is a fear. It's not necessarily an avoidant fear, although that can definitely happen. What I found it is, and maybe this is something you can check for yourself when you're watching, is it's a fear of being embarrassed, of looking like a fool, not being competent at something, not being seen as strong, being seen as vulnerable. All of this is basically, can be colloquialized into, we have an idea about ourselves as someone who's a high achiever, or someone who's successful, or someone who's smart and logical and doesn't really make much mistakes. And that identity stops us from trying something new, even though we know that at some point it's not going to be something that we can avoid. Okay? And it's part of us to really have a lot of humility. And if this doesn't sound like you, maybe this is my own projections, or it definitely is my own projection, but it doesn't mean it's not accurate. But if this doesn't seem like you, don't worry, right? I don't want to put thoughts in your mind that aren't yours. But the reason I'm saying this, because it is so relevant to a lot of the people that I've worked with, is it's really means that we have to be a beginner again, and beginner in an avenue in which is the avenue of socializing, which we were always not really that confident in, or we weren't that fulfilled in, or we didn't feel that confident in. So really, a lot of the time, as soon as we embrace humility, that's when this type of self-sabotage can stop. So some 4 exercises I want you to do to kind of round off this chapter is, what's holding me back from exploring connections and relationships right now? is it something fully logical? Or is it something more, if I'm being honest with myself? Am I afraid to open that Pandora's box of being more social, being around people, having to be a bit vulnerable, having to go out there and hear the word no, be rejected, to show me where I actually stand in this world? If I try and I fail, I no longer have the excuse that I'm not even trying in this area of relationships. That's why I don't have any fulfilling relationships. This was a big one, actually. A lot of the time when we got to the real deep unconscious shadow or unconscious blind spot of where people were, then a lot of the time, the reason why they hadn't worked on this at all, despite having had a really clear pain point of not feeling like they have like-minded people around them or in a romantic relationship with, or even in a professional work environment with people that they at least could get on somewhat with, while the 9 to 5 was going. It's because at least if they said they weren't working on it, they had an excuse to fall back on. It was safety, it was security. Oh yeah, of course I can't do that, right? Because of course I'm not getting anything because I'm not even focused on it. When I focus on it, that's when things will get better. When really, if they just did it now, it would be faster and they wouldn't have to give up anything. Which was what the breakthrough was a lot of the time, which is, well, first of all, that's a fallacy, because if I've never tried it, I don't know. Maybe there's something big here that's affecting all types of things in my life. And the faster I get that addressed, the faster I no longer have to go through this pain. So like I said, this is the example I used at the start. We'll call him Joe. Thought he had to go monk mode and now is in a beautiful, fulfilling relationship because he realized that he can have it all. And now the next thing, the blind spot that got open to him, like I said here, was working on his business. Because when his business and when his friendships actually were going pretty well, and when that part of his life was handled, the part of his life that wasn't handled and he was going monk mode on was relationships and dating and finding connections in that way. But now that he had that there, he had the date, he was dating, and then he's getting into this relationship now with a really mature, healthy woman. Suddenly, that's when he wasn't looking at his business anymore. And now that he's able to see this, he's able to realize that he can have it all. So that's just an example of how we can be self-sabotaging and putting glass ceilings on ourselves when it comes to relationships. The next one is self-sabotaging workflows. So specifically, the 3 polarities here are discipline, habits, and organization. So this is one that one of my clients struggled with for a long time a few months ago, which was staying up late or staying in bed too long when you wake up, going to blow off steam at the last minute when it should be planned better, leading you to feeling groggy, underslept at the beginning of the work week, right? So this usually, we'll get into this later on, but this is usually just like a classic example of self-sabotaging work. Let's say you have a busy work day and then you go out partying. So you wake up that work day, underslept, a little bit hungover, not really feeling the best. And then the work that you do isn't to your best quality, and that holds you back for weeks or months, even, especially if it's a really important work day. Staying up late, a lot to do with sleep, discipline kind of issues, and staying in bed too long, scrolling, that kind of stuff. Another version of it is endless researching and planning, not enough action. There's a block around action usually here. So I talk about it all the time, but my 5 stages of motion, or not my one, I got it from my mentor, Kim Barter, which is autonomy, initiation, follow through, completion, and then celebration. If there's a block around action, that will be the initiation part of it. There's an initiation, block around initiation specifically, and then you'll have to go and do shadow work on that. If that sounds like you, my shadow work program in the link below is going to help you out a ton there, as well as the free content on this channel. But it's much more organized and much more practical in that guide. So I recommend going and taking a look. So to give an example of me, when I first started this business, so not business in general, but this business, which was really my own thing, I was so stressed and it was so different to me. And there was so much new stimulus, and money and work specifically in career was always something that I tried to push aside. So it was a big blind spot for me. It was the one area of my life where stress could still get the better of me. After doing all that meditation and shadow work, literally nothing else really fazed me at all. or I was still getting triggered, but I had equanimity with him, which is something that gets developed from doing these practices at a really advanced level. But business was the one thing which I had a lot of innocence around. So when I first started business, and if there's any people watching from that time period who are around me at this point will be laughing right now, is I would be partying and blowing off streets of steam with friends to distract myself from the stress. So it's an avoidance cycle, right? In the video around procrastination, the 4 different types of procrastination, I go into what avoidance cycles are in a bit more detail, and also in the free product as well. So I'll let you know. So I'll let you go and find that. I really recommend that. But basically, an avoidance cycle is we have something going bad or poorly in our life, and we employ an avoidance cycle to get us back up to our emotional baseline. So instead of handling stress in a mature way, I elongated my building of this business by probably about 6 months to a full year. Because I would just go out and party on the most random days, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then that would mess up my entire week. You see? That's one way that we can self-sabotage with discipline. So, like I said, I mentioned before, a client I have, and I still am working with, had a problem staying up late, and it was messing with his business flow as well, because the mornings weren't very productive. It means that his day would elongate. It means that he would stay up late because he didn't have much free time to himself, and that cycle would just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. The breakthrough for him came, however, when he realized that he wasn't taking enough time for himself during the day. Doesn't mean you have to take like super long breaks. If you're in like a real crunch period, then you got to do what you got to do. But he was staying up late unconsciously as a form of self-care, on a form of looking after himself, and also as a form of rebellion, because there was a part of him that didn't feel like he was appreciating himself or just enjoying his time as much. So it would rebel, and he would just watch YouTube or watch Netflix until like 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning when he had the full work day the next day. So we resolved the ego want. The ego want here was to enjoy himself, take care of himself, not push himself too hard in a way which was in a bullying way. So as soon as we took care of the ego state of taking care and looking after himself, then this issue hasn't come up since, unconsciously. That's the power of unconscious work, of looking at things at the deep core roots level and resolving it at that level can just lead to habits that we've had for years, because he had this habit for years, just dropping off because he had it during med school, right, which is also another really demanding place. And he was still able to work a ton on his business. He was actually able to work more on his business because he was able to plan and organize his days and have more discipline, have more willpower, waking up because he had a good night of sleep, was well rested, and he was waking up earlier. So another version of this, which again I talk about in the 4 different types of procrastination, highly recommend that video, is doing fun work over the boring needle moving work that your business is sorely lacking, or your work is sorely lacking, or whatever it is you're trying to do is sorely lacking. Work can be a procrastination. In fact, it's one of the most kind of clever ego tricks we can play on ourselves. It can also be self-sabotage as well, because we overlook the fact that it's not a needle moving work, and we can just chalk it up as work. So we say, oh, we've been really productive today, and we get that validation, we get that ego boost, we get that, boost of spirit that, wow, we've been really productive and we really crushed it today. But in reality, yes, we might have done work, and in some ways it might have been better than not doing any work at all, but that's not what we need. We don't need something that's just okay. We need to address the things that are actually happening in our life. So when you can see that blind spot, and you can see with will, wisdom, and compassion, that's when that can move. How can we do that? Well, you see with true wisdom that, wait, let's take a step back. This is not the work that I need to be doing right now. But we still see ourselves with compassion, because if we don't, then we get into negative spirals. We get into negative spirals, makes exactly like the example I just used with my client, more likely for us to rebel against ourselves, more likely for self-sabotage. The compassion comes when we say, at least we're still trying to do something good for ourselves and our business. And really, truly understand that. Like, this is much more mature and better than just going and jerking off all day, or going and not doing anything productive, right? At least we're doing something. So we can see it with true compassion, but then it's our job to come in, because we're the leader, we're the democratically elected leader. We're not a bully, we're not a dictator, we're a leader. a strong leader, to be like, okay, but it's time to do this. And that comes with a mix of unconscious and conscious work, which is what the one-on-one is all about. If you guys are in my one-on-one and you have questions about that, then let me know. I can explain it to you. We're already doing that. If you're not, it's not the most relevant. Just make sure that you're hitting both ends, basically. The conscious, like really like allowing yourself to push yourself in a way which is sustainable, whilst also doing the unconscious work so we're not fighting uphill. Third is self-sabotaging via a lack of self-confidence. This is such a big one. Oh my God. Saying you're in a grind phase at work, / you need to hustle, / you can't spend the extra time on this other thing, when in reality it's because you don't want to look at the fact you built a nice life but haven't fixed the problem you've always struggled with, which is confidence. This was a big kind of archetypical character that I used to work with a lot with in the old company that I was part of. We had a lot of clients that were have really done well for themselves, you know, good job, good career, respected, kind of had built this persona that they were the kind of guy that had figured out life, right? However, they still felt like the same person at who they were at the start of their journey. So they had all this external validation and their behaviors were different and externally they looked different, right? But they still felt like the same person. Same insecurity, same issues, same need for external validation. In fact, they needed it more because that external validation was the only thing propping them up into being this person. And it's a very humbling thing, and why all those guys were super great and all the guys that I worked with have been super great when it comes to this, because it takes a massive strength of character to be like, wow, that was amazing. It's given me so many different lessons and life lessons, and I'm thankful for it. All of that kind of good stuff. However, it's not the thing that's actually going to get me over the edge, because I still feel like the same person. If that hasn't changed now, it's not going to change. So outside validation, like I said, it can pump your state a bit, but it's temporary and it's flimsy. This is the problem with outside validation. So if you're in a club, or if you're walking down the street, or if you're in a business meeting and people are giving you loads of external validation, that will pump your state like crazy. And you'll feel like you're on top of the world. The problem is when it's not internalized and embodied, when the real deep work hasn't been done, then it doesn't actually change permanently how you feel about yourself as a person. With a caveat, there is such a thing as state-centered traits. The problem with external validation is because that validation is not coming from you, it's not actually a state created by yourself. Unlike TWIM and meta and unconditional love and compassion and equanimity and joy, all these states that we work on creating in the one-on-one work, and I talk about it a bit in the channel as well, also in the 3-hour shadow work live stream as well, all that stuff comes from within. We're cultivating it by ourselves. It's not dependent on other people. The moment a state is dependent on external resources, that's something which is almost impossible to embody and take with you, right? It's why when people take, I don't know, like MDMA or some kind of really state-altering drug, and it makes them feel on top of the world, why it doesn't actually change anything. It can open them up, it creates a lot of breadth, for sure, but in terms of a permanent, embodied, personality-rooted, deep-rooted change, doesn't happen. 99 times out of 100. But the reason why people procrastinate on this and thus self-sabotage on this is because starting something new, some new work on this confidence issue, seems daunting, seems intimidating. It's also a bit embarrassing, admitting that you need help, especially with this kind of stuff, which is why it takes a lot of strength to be able to say that. So the wound festers, external validation becomes more and more vital to your sense of self-worth. Highs and lows of confidence make it a very unstable ride. And it's that instability which kind of pushes people over the edge a lot of the time. Because if you don't even feel stability within yourself, then your life that follows after that is also going to be unstable too, because it's built on foundations of sand. Meanwhile, this is the thing that will rocket fuel all areas of your life, business, friendships and relationships, and general life enjoyment, because everything is built on your sense of confidence, certainty, assertiveness, everything. right? So really, it's the biggest needle mover. But sometimes it's hard to accept that this is an area you need to work on. So we sabotage long-term growth with short-term thinking. Short-term thinking, oh, I don't need to look at that. I'm already all good. But in the long term, the problem with internal issues, so if you look at it long term, the longer something stays, the more ingrained it is, the harder it becomes to shift, which is why nipping it in the bud is always the better option. So what I'd advise here is take a step back and look at the next few years, possibly even a decade, rather than just this year in order to increase perspective. That's the main thing here. And then part 4.5, self-sabotaging via opportunity execution, the caution versus risk polarity. So this is us thinking that we have to procrastinate by waiting for the perfect moment. Feel good, things need to be perfectly aligned before taking action, leads to missed opportunity in lieu of a reality that doesn't actually exist. The reality doesn't actually exist is the fact that this perfect moment doesn't really happen. So in the incredible book, The War on Art, the muse, the creative muse, is not something which just comes to you one day and an artist, they start writing. No, you have to show up every single day. And then the muse, and then you come to the muse. You earn your chance to be creative, to get in that space, to get into that flow. So perfect flow, it does exist, but us waiting for it, us waiting for an opportunity, or this needs to be better. I should focus on this first. I just need to get my finances in order. I need to make sure that I feel a bit more confident. I need to feel really good and before I say to this person I really like them and I want to go out with them, right? No. We have to create it. It's like creating your own luck. You can't wait for your own luck. It's a bad strategy, you know? Perfect flow is something you have to earn. The muse, like I said, is something that comes up after you show up every single day. It's not something that magically comes up. It's something that has to be earned. But under the guise of optimization, gaining flow state, or having an intuition, these are all like the common kind of language cues around it. The opportunity to go after what you want arises and passes away. And then you get stuck in that loop and it reinforces because you keep waiting for the perfect moment and it never comes. So what is the thing that you keep on doing? Waiting. Because you're staying in that waiting game, that gets reinforced and you just become a waiter, right? It can happen in terms of starting a new business, closing it, like going after deals, making a pivot, asking somebody out, inviting people, like can be doing something new socially, like in planning a party, doing something really fun, something like starting a new hobby that you're really interested in. All of that kind of stuff. We're waiting for the perfect moment, and meanwhile, time just keeps on ticking. So part A, this is the and a half bit because it's split into two. There's part A and there's part B. So there's sabotaging by being too cautious. This is analysis paralysis. Doesn't need to be said too much of here because analysis paralysis is pretty common. But it's basically needing all the data, needing all the analysis, needing all your I's dotted and your T's crossed in order to feel safe, secure, and confident to take action. As a result, nothing gets done, right? And then number B is kind of being too risky, something which I don't see talked about too much. Headless chicken syndrome. This is something that I had a lot of. Well, I had all of it, but this is the one that I guess I would lead with a bit more, which is there's kind of like a restlessness or an insecurity or an uncomfortability at waiting or researching or planning a little bit. Maybe not taking action right now so we can plan a bit and then taking action. There's just like a do mentality. I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. And in some ways, it feels more freeing and it feels more empowering than analysis paralysis. And in some ways, it is because you actually get stuff done. But long term, it will become a problem. The proper systems aren't in place to sustain whatever it is going after work to get what it is you're going after. So work gets harder and harder instead of getting easier and easier because that's when momentum and willpower starts to drop off in importance. And actually building permanent systems, having a proper plan, having a proper action protocol, SOPs, all that kind of stuff, really start coming into their own. This is something that an old client that I've worked on and off with had, which kind of started a decade-long depression, not clinical depression, but depression in terms of like mood and just kind of all areas of life. He was like an amazing salesperson and was able to just do in that kind of work. But because he kind of had a lot of restlessness around building systems. He hired someone to do all the back end and delivery, led to a huge fight, a huge split because he didn't have any experience with that and he was just delegating it all to this other person, completely broke his business. And he spiraled into this whole kind of like decade long depression. Like I said, not clinical depression, but just wasn't able to get his back on his feet. Confidence suffered, like all of this stuff that it was building. And because it was based on external validation, all just went to zero. And that was a tough period for him to get through. So now we get to the action protocols. What can we do now? First one, like I said, go and download the most practical guide to shadow work on the internet. It was originally for my one-on-one clients. It's 3 hours of content. There's a 4-week boot camp to get you from doing zero unconscious work to being able to do shadow work at the deepest level, all on your own. So go ahead and sign up your email. I'll send you a follow-up email just to see how you're doing and see if you're having the best experience. That's the first one. But one is identify one part of what I've mentioned and get specific. So not a general theme, but a specific time recently that one of these self-sabotaging things happens to you. And how we can formulate that if we have an ROI formula, so return on investment formula, which is we want to prioritize solving. The ease of solving plus impact of solving is our order of priority of solving. So what that means is whatever we feel like is the simplest thing to get over, plus which will have the deepest and most instant impact in us, that's the thing that we focus on first. And that's the thing that we have a specific we think of a specific situation where that happened to us. Why we need a specific situation is because of part 2. With this specific example, we have to deconstruct the how and the what of our mental process that has made this situation happen. So where's the what of what happened, which is what was the thing that we self-sabotaged in, but we have to dissect what is it specifically that's happening inside of me that made that happen. Because somebody else can have this thing happen to them and they don't self-sabotage. So there's some way that I'm creating a meaning out of this, that I'm creating a story or identity around this that has to be addressed. 3, we get to the core root of the issue, the root cause, basically. This is basically the how and when of when it was shaped. So this self-sabotaging pattern didn't just happen out of nowhere, right? We were not born self-sabotaging. It had to have been learned at some point. This is something that we have to address. So this is, like I said, how it began and how it was shaped. And then the third part of the trifecta is how it's being sustained by us still now. Just because it's something we used to do doesn't mean that automatically it's something that's just a part of who we are. There's a lot of things that we used to do and used to be big problems for us that are no longer problems for us. So there's something specifically happening here which is making us sustain this pattern, this habit, this form of self-sabotage. We need to get curious on that, right? Then we heal the root cause of shadow and unconscious issues. This is in my 3-hour shadow work program, which like I said, is free. So just sign up your email. Goes into all of this detail here, which will give you the step-by-step guide of how to actually do all of this, okay? This is just a summary of basically what's in there. So, and it depends on whether it's an introjection, projection, split ego state, has to be healed differently, letting go, re-owning, reintegrating. Sometimes when you get to the root cause, it just goes. Because sometimes just seeing it with wisdom or just seeing it from this perspective makes it just drop off. And sometimes it can drop off through conscious effort. So enforcing guidelines on yourself for things like workflows, or actually making a conscious decision now that it's no longer unconscious and just in the shadow, because you know what your blind spots are by doing this process, and then you can remedy them consciously. So this can be stuff like working with a one-on-one mentor you trust, stopping avoiding situations you were previously avoiding, like relationships or confidence, and all that kind of stuff. And then number 5, super, super important, embodiment practice. You need to stay with this one issue, constantly recheck, do the embodiment practice that's mentioned in the shadow work guide, and do not move, stay there for around 30 to 60 days before moving on to the next one. If you have questions, you can email me. It's in the YouTube description. I'll also email you as well when you sign up to the program, and we can do a bit more personalized one-on-one feedback there. But that's it for today, guys. Enjoy.